Welcome to the Region Free Gamers podcast. On today's episode, grab your favorite 2x4, watch out for the biggie man, and get ready to paint the walls red with guts. We're talking Splatterhouse. Welcome, everyone, to another gore-tastic episode of the Region Free Gamers podcast fluent in gaming. My name is Arnaldo, and I will be your host for today's terrifying proceedings. Just a quick reminder to those of you listening, please drop by Apple Podcasts, subscribe, and leave us a review. It really helps. You can leave a review anywhere. Like, you can write a review on your local bathroom stall and send me a picture, and I'll appreciate it. But Apple Podcasts is the number one. On this episode, we're going to be talking about the retro horror franchise Splatterhouse. And with me today to help me tackle this particular topic are two of my incredible co-hosts. The first is my Puerto Rican connect from all the way in the Bronx, New York, Anthony. How you doing, Anthony?
BX, what's up, baby?
Not much.
You know, it's funny. You always tell me to send you pictures from the bathroom stall. I just didn't.
Listen, we're gonna cut that. Whoever's editing this, please cut that. And joining us today to discuss all things in the Splatterhouses is the authors of Memoir of a Virtual Caveman, co-author of Hardcore Gaming's 101, The Guide to Retro Horror, and the owner and operator of West Mansion, the Splatterhouse homepage, Rob Strangman. Rob, how are you doing?
I feel like painting the walls red today. How about you?
That's what we're hopefully going to do. So Splatterhouse is a franchise that I will admit I had very little contact with. As, you know, growing up, didn't know about it at all. Once I started collecting, I started hearing about it, and I've gotten very, very interested in the game. So I'm very happy to have you on board because I know you are the Splatterhouse guy.
This is
but
true.
Before we sort of dive into that aspect of it, which we will, I promise, I wanted to, just get an opportunity to ask you about your sort of video game journey. Like, when did you start playing video games and what sort of got you into it?
Oh, God. I'm going to really date myself with this, but I would say probably around 1979 or so.
Okay.
My older brother had given my family one of those generic standalone Pong units. And one of those things where the sound came out of the speaker on the unit.
Yeah.
And then we moved up from there to an Atari 2600, and about, I'd say 87, 88, I got introduced to the NES and the Sega Master System, and it was just all downhill from there.
Gotcha. What were some of your favorite games from like these earlier days, like NES, Atari, and earlier than that?
Well, the Atari games that really grabbed me in particular were, let's see, Yar's Revenge was a big one. Pitfall.
Classic.
Definitely Pitfall. And Haunted House. Yeah, that kind of started my whole fascination with like horror games right there.
Yeah, I was gonna say Haunted House is not one that I hear too often for people. As far as like, I've heard of people talking about it and how they enjoyed it, but not really when they're recounting like the games that really inspired me or drew me to video games. So that's a cool addition.
Oh, yeah, it was a big inspiration.
As far as, it's weird. I always ask this question to anybody we get on the show who's had like extensive history with video games, who's been there pretty much from the Atari or prior all the way to now. And it's just like, what has it been like for you to see that sort of evolution, to go from what Yar's Revenge was to now, like, we're on the cusp of PlayStation 5 and Xbox, Mega Cycle 360X or whatever they call it now.
Yeah.
Like, what is that sort of transition been like?
For the first couple of decades, it was just amazing seeing the leaps. I mean, you went from the Atari, ColecoVision and whatnot to the NES, and it was just like mind-blowing. And then going to the Genesis and the Super NES and TurboGrafx, that was even bigger. Then, of course, PlayStation, and that was just like, wow, 3D graphics. And then they just got better looking, and somewhere along the line, though, it's like the games got more advanced, and I just kind of stopped.
Okay,
in fact,
gotcha. So do you play like modern gen stuff, or do you try to stick closer to the classics that you sort of played as you were growing up?
I pretty much these days stay with the classics. I got a 360, but I always said there was only one thing that would ever get me to upgrade that far, and that was if a miracle happened, and it did, and it relates to what we're talking about today.
Yeah, exactly. And we're gonna get into it. It's definitely something that, you know, I don't think that I could have done this episode if you hadn't agreed to be on it, because Splatterhouse, I think, needs a very specific touch. It needs somebody who really loves it and really, you know, has dug deep into it, to sort of bring that out, and really get people engaged in it. It's one of those games that I think turns a lot of people off at first sight, and then once you start playing it, you sort of see the depth, that it's not just, you know, gore and guts and blood and whatnot, but there's a real, like, fun game, fun mechanic, fun story behind all of it. I know that part of what you've done in relation to Splatterhouse is, like I said off the top, is run West Mansion, which is sort of I would call it the Splatterhouse page, like where you need to go for all your news, your history, your everything about Splatterhouse. How did that sort of get started? How did you first decide to do that?
Well, that's a bit of a story, actually, as most of the stories I tell are. But no, what happened was, I remember in the mid-'90s, I got online for the first time, and I started hunting around for games. And I found these fan sites, like Kurt Collada's Castlevania Dungeon was one of the first ones I found. He just started it, and just looking at all the stuff he had up there at the time, and it's like, wow, are all these fan sites like this? I gotta find more. So I'm looking up games like Gradius, and I tried looking up Splatterhouse, and there was nothing. Just nothing. So it's like, you know, someone needs to make a website that's like the Castlevania Dungeon of Splatterhouse. I wonder who's going to do that. And eventually it's like, you know what? I'm going to have to do it myself. But then it didn't even get off the ground for a year or so. Until one day I happened to win an auction on eBay. I won Splatterhouse from Paco Graffiti, which I'd only read about, never actually played. And I remember taking it home, playing it, and after I got it from the mail. And I was like, this game is great. The world needs to know more about this. Time to do that Splatterhouse site. That is basically how that came about.
Oh, wow. And so how long have you been running the site now? Because the site's still going.
Technically, it's archive only right now. I ran it for 10 years. And then a year after the new Splatterhouse came out, I just kind of decided, I'm getting older. I'm not really, making anything off of this aside from, the occasional bit of praise. And I didn't really have anything new to contribute. So I said, all right, I'll put it in archive and start a Facebook page for it. The Facebook page is still going. I'm not running that anymore, but a couple of the guys that I trust are running it, and they're doing a good job with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I love, I did a lot of research off of West Mansion for this episode, and it was a great resource. I kind of wish that every topic we covered had just a dedicated page where somebody had done all the hard work of collecting everything and just give it to me. That would make my life a lot easier.
I can tell you someone that felt the same way as you. Namco Bandai.
See, great minds. They do think alike. One thing I found interesting is we started talking on Instagram, which is, I think, where we have our strongest presence and where I sort of first discovered your account. And I saw that one of your I don't want to call it a resolution because those end up getting broken. But one of your goals for this year was to collect every Splatterhouse game.
Yep.
And I think when I hear something like that, it really resonates with me because there are definitely, I've never been like a completionist collector. I've never been like, I want a full set of this or a full set of that, but there's definitely franchises like specific video games that I'm like, I would love to have every, game of this series, or I would love to have every game of this developer. So after all this time, what sort of made you want to take on this quest?
Well, I thought about it for a while. I mean, I've been giving this thought for a couple of years now. And I know I've seen people with their complete sets and whatnot. I can't do the completionist thing either because there's just too much junk I'd never play.
Yeah.
I'm not going to play all these, licensed shovelware games and whatnot.
You're not going to play FIFA 2006 10 years from now?
Nope, and I wouldn't play Barney's Hide and Seek Adventure for the Genesis either. But with Splatterhouse, like, I know there are people out there who think I have this massive warehouse full of Splatterhouse stuff, and nothing can be further from the truth. But I decided it's like the one thing that would be attainable would be getting the games, even though it's going to be really expensive. But this is not going to be just a this year thing. This is probably going to take me some time. Because you got your relatively inexpensive items, and I say relatively these days, but stuff like the European Splatterhouse 2, the PlayStation 3 Splatterhouse, which I don't have yet, stuff like that. But then you move up into stuff like the FM Towns port of the original arcade game, then that can go for over $1,000. And then the arcade board itself.
Yeah. So
this is going to be a journey.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing it, reading it. I'm very intrigued because there's always a base level of knowledge you think you have about a series or a specific video game until you start really digging into what it would take to have a quote unquote complete collection of a specific thing. So it's like an FM Towns port. I didn't know that existed.
It's regular.
I never really gave any thought to European releases of Splatterhouse. Like that's just not something that entered my brain until it's like, oh yeah, if you want every Splatterhouse game, you got to get every Splatterhouse game.
Yeah, because when Rob just said he wants to collect every Splatterhouse game, I was like, well, how many are there? And then I'm just pulling up the list now. I'm like, oh wow, Rob, does your completion list consider like any games related to West Mansion? Or is that just kind of like, that's too much?
Yeah, well, mainly just looking for the mainline Splatterhouse games. Yeah, there's a few that can be considered spiritual successors or even like counterparts. Like, for example, you guys ever played Monster Party for the NES?
Yes, I've heard of it. I have not played it myself.
First, you should. It is a great little game. And but the thing is, it's so much like Splatterhouse Wimpaku Graffiti in tone and in humor content that it could they could release it as a 2-pack and it would be like, wow, these games are so similar. So like, especially if you look at the Japanese Monster Party prototype that leaked a while back, it was all about parodies and stuff of movies. And so exactly like Wimpaku Graffiti. Exactly. So speaking of which, if I may digress for a second, I did write a good article about Monster Party in that Hardcore Gaming 101 book and laid out all the parodies and everything in there. So
sweet. That is when I first heard of Wimpaku Graffiti, I thought somebody was playing a prank on me. I did not understand that was like a real game that existed.
And
so
I didn't know about it until I saw your outline for this episode. And then I looked it up and I'm looking at some gameplay of it and I'm just like, oh yeah, okay, this is exactly what Nintendo would do if they made a Splatterhouse.
And now you see why I wanted to go and do that for West Mansion, because like the world needs to know more about this game.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
I agree.
Although like I wonder how like the seal of quality that Nintendo put on their boxes got away with throwing crucifixes at people.
That probably would have been changed.
Yeah, the North American version of Wimpaku Graffiti would have been vastly different from the Japanese. I would have to assume
it would have been lollipops.
Exactly.
Like, let's censor this.
That might have made it even wackier.
Oh Lord, I don't think we can handle that much wackiness.
Actually, I think that makes it even scarier. Somebody's throwing a lollipop at you. Like, they're
serious.
Yeah, then they really want to kill you.
Which, circle back around to Monster Party for a second. If you look at the Japanese prototype, it's like, it's funny, it's got all the parodies and whatnot, but they had to remove most of the parodies for the US version.
Okay.
And it just makes it an even stranger game.
That seems like, it's downright bizarre at times. Well, that's the thing, right? Because in my mind now, I'm like, oh, I know Monster Party. Like, I know, all these things. And then if you take out all those things, I'm like, I feel unnerved. I feel like I'm somewhere where I'm not supposed to be.
Exactly.
But so digging right in, let's just jump right into Splatterhouse. Just a few quick facts for the listeners. So Splatterhouse, the original Splatterhouse, released in obviously the arcade and then ported to the TurboGrafx 16. The original arcade was released in all three territories: Japan in '88, North America, and Europe in '89. And I find this interesting because I feel, and you can speak to this more than I could, Rob, but I feel like the Splatterhouse arcade machine or arcade game just in general is one of the more obscure arcade games. I've recently seen it and played it in a local arcade bar, but that was not a machine that I've not just hadn't seen prior to that, but hadn't really heard people talk about ever playing.
It's true. It didn't help that it was a conversion kit. So
okay,
that was one thing I think which might have helped it from prevented it being a little more widespread than it should have been. But another thing too, of course, when I first started West Mansion, there were all these rumors saying that Splatterhouse had been banned in arcades across the country and so on and so forth. And it's like that was never actually true. It just wasn't really seen much. In fact, I encountered the original game one time. It was back in 1991 at Universal Studios, Florida.
That's amazing.
It was just tucked in a back corner of one of their arcades. No one was playing it. Everyone was more focused on whatever they had up front. And of course, I saw it, and it's like, well, I know where all my tokens are going.
which also like goes contra to exactly what these people are saying. Like, oh, Splatterhouse has been banned across the United States. Where are you going to find it? Oh, just a children's amusement park in Orlando, Florida. Like, exactly where you'd expect to find it. You know. No, so when you say just to clarify for my own edification here, when you say a conversion kit, you mean there was no dedicated arcade cabinet for it, right? It was just installed in either a custom or whatever they had lying around.
Yeah, you just pop in the board, switch out the marquee, and as long as you had a joystick and 2 buttons and your coin slot, you were good.
It was good to go. All right. So yeah, and then obviously the arcade not as well known, but the TurboGrafx port, I feel like now calling it a cult classic would be a disservice. I feel like it's more well known than that. I feel like more people have played and experienced Splatterhouse than that. I could be wrong, but it seems like a game that, especially on the TurboGrafx 16, stood out. You know,
definitely.
Like that system obviously doesn't have as robust a library as the, NES or the Sega Genesis or anything like that. But Splatterhouse was a game that I feel like immediately stood out, not just because of the gore and violence, but it always felt, this is why I feel like I was always drawn to Splatterhouse a little bit personally, is because horror games, quote unquote, of that era, especially in North America, not as much in Japan, I think, because they sort of explored the genre a little more. But I feel like the horror games I can think of that era were just like gory for gory's sake, and also like just kind of kooky, like to the point of being like ridiculous, like Chiller or something like that. Like that's the kind of stuff I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Whereas Splatterhouse was an actual game. Like there's a story, there's a narrative, there's characters, there's reasons to care about why you're beheading zombies other than, it's fun.
Exactly. The TurboGrafx port, that was what really exposed the world to Splatterhouse as far as I'm concerned, because granted, in Japan, gamers knew about it. The arcade was more widespread over there, and when it came out with the PC Engine, it was a fairly big seller as far as I could tell. It was enough to get Namco thinking about doing a sequel. And then when it came out over here, I remember seeing commercials for it. It was like this kind of... Did you ever see the commercial?
I did not, but now I definitely need to look it up.
You can find it on YouTube. But basically, it's got Rick, and he's like holding a big log, and you have this overly dramatic narrator. He's like, this game is called Splatterhouse. You're trying to get your girlfriend back. There's blood and gore, and you say you want to play this game? And it's just like, wow.
That's awesome.
Those are the best commercials back then.
My God.
Those are the best.
Yeah.
I remember though, it's funny because I will always, even to this day, I just think of Splatterhouse as a TurboGrafx.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, you're not wrong. That's how I thought of it.
Yeah, for the longest time.
Until very recently.
I will say that was the first time I ever played Splatterhouse on the TurboGrafx.
On the TG16.
Yeah, a friend of mine actually had the system. He He lived up north. I was in Florida at the time. He'd come down every summer to visit. And he brought his turbo with him. And, of course, seen it in magazines. And he's like, check this out. He pulls out, Bonk's Adventure. He pulls out Ninja Spirit, which, just gotta say, Ninja Spirit is one of the greatest games ever made. Victory Run, Keith Courage, and so we're playing all this. Like, this stuff is great. And then him and my younger brother and parents go to the mall one day. And when they get back, he immediately runs into the room, fires up the turbo, and I walk in and it's like, what'd you get? He throws the box to me. And I'm looking at it and it's like, what is this? What is this? It's like Jason Voorhees and he's about to kick the crap out of some dude with chainsaw hands. Splatterhouse? I don't know what this is, but I have to see it.
Yeah. The Splatterhouse cover art for the TurboGrafx 16 is it's a masterwork.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just the slime green lettering with blood dripping down from it. Rick looking like Jason Voorhees about to fight a man with chainsaw arms. Like, if I had been a kid and I'd seen this, I would have immediately bought it. It just speaks to every sensibility that immediately appeals to me back in the day.
And don't forget that little warning on the box either.
This was a big deal back then. This was considered a very gross, mature title.
Yeah, the parental advisory, just for the readers, reads as follows. The horrifying theme of this game may be inappropriate for young children and cowards. Which I love. I love that they did something like that. Especially because I am a self-described coward, and I definitely would have been too scared to play this game. Just a little background, just for the listener. So, Splatterhouse on the TurboGrafx 16 and the arcade, it's a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up, is what they call it. I guess they're technically right. But Splatterhouse just doesn't feel like a beat-em-up to me.
It's more like Kung Fu Master in a way.
Yeah. Right. I would sort of see it that same way. That's actually a really good analogy for it, or comparison. Directed by Shigeru Yokoyama. He's worked on Time Crisis, Klonoa, Xenosaga, big things. Music composed by Katsuro Tajima and Yoshinori Kawamoto. Both have worked on the Taiko no Tatsujin games, and have contributed to Smash Bros. They've also worked on things like Katamari and Felios. And designed by Akira Usukura, who's worked on Xevious 3D and Pac-Mania. So, big games. Oh, yeah. All of them. Coming from Namco, there's obviously a pedigree there. And Splatterhouse seems to be like the place where a lot of these people cut their teeth, like one of their early sort of productions. Heavily inspired by American slasher films and the works of H.P. Lovecraft. And that's obvious to anybody who's ever played Splatterhouse. Like, there's obviously an inspiration, even as we've discussed, just from Rick's design. Just from the outset on the cover art, you can tell that this game wears its inspiration on its sleeve, and it's very proud of, just flaunting all these references to slasher films and things like that, which I mean, I'm a sucker for that stuff. I'll eat that up any day.
I'll tell you, for the longest time at West Mansion, I had a lot of diehard horror fans coming in after the site went public, and they were pointing out some of the most obscure stuff I had never even heard of. But when you went back and played the game, it's like, wow. It's like, that's accurate. It's like, what are these Japanese guys watching over here? It's like they're like importing some of the most obscure horror gems from the U.S. and saying, hey, it's been great in our game.
This is, it's amazing. It's crazy to think that this is sort of the love child of all these, sort of horror, slasher horror films, some H.P. Lovecraft stuff sprinkled in, just to create this sort of, I guess, homage or like, just tip of the cap to the entire horror genre. I think that's really cool. I think that sort of gives Splatterhouse its own identity, its own sort of personality, if you will. And obviously there's enough there in originality as well that ties it all together and makes it just a really cool package.
Yeah, it's definitely a very Japanese take on American horror. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I just have to throw in that I'm a diehard Evil Dead fan. So seeing the references they put in was just like, I love this game. But
I did want to say, because Rob, I know that we've talked a little bit about how you first were introduced to Splatterhouse, how you first played it and got into it. Anthony, I did want to ask you, what is your experience with Splatterhouse? Like, had you played this game before? Was it one that you knew about when you were a kid?
Yeah, I definitely knew about it when I was a kid. It was back in, I want to say 89, when I had to make the fateful decision whether to purchase a Sega Genesis or a TurboGrafx 16. I went with the Sega Genesis, but like Splatterhouse is one of those games that was calling me. It was because, like, if you think about it, there was no way to see these games unless you actually played them back then. It wasn't like you could pull up a video or, maybe go to a friend's house. But so there was this lore about Splatterhouse. And I was always so curious about it, but I didn't really get to see much of it until I was older, and really until more recently when we started digging into, the franchise. Yeah. And I will say though, I didn't know about the arcade either, right? Never saw it in an arcade, but it's interesting because back then, to see the port to the TurboGrafx 16 be so close, really, to the arcade version, that was a major thing back then. Yeah. That was that you didn't see that often. It was never, you had the 8-bit era, and then you had the TurboGrafx 16, and then, for that gap before the Genesis and everything came out. So that time frame, you never really saw an arcade perfect port of anything. So it's really interesting to see such a close to perfect port of the of Splatterhouse to the TurboGrafx 16, because when you play the TurboGrafx 16 version and you look at the arcade version, obviously there's certain things that the arcade version could do a little better, but for the most part, it's the same game. So really impressive, man, back then to see something like this.
Yeah, it was a lot like seeing Strider on the Genesis for the first time.
Right. That was probably a good example of that too.
Yeah, it's definitely worth mentioning, in my opinion, obviously, which is the only opinion any of you should care about, that Splatterhouse looks so good. Like when you see screenshots of this game running on PC Engine or TurboGrafx 16, like I always try to steer away from pointing out just the blood and gore and stuff, because I think that's the trope that a lot of people fall into when they're talking about Splatterhouse. It's like, oh yeah, there's so much blood and so epic and scary, blah blah blah. But it's like that is when the sort of graphical mastery, the wizardry that they put into this game is on full display. Like when you see these monsters, these disgusting creatures that come at you like bone and sinew and muscle exposed, like all those little details and all of these crazy sprites look so good. Like this is a game that holds up so well to even like modern scrutiny as far as pixel art goes, as far as like 16-bit graphic work goes. Splatterhouse is top tier in my opinion.
Yeah, and that applies to the entire series. I feel you look at the entire series and it's still amazing.
There's a colleague of mine who goes by the screen name Corpsemonger, who once described the creatures from Splatterhouse as being, how do you call it, sewer cemetery filth. So that's a great description.
That's appropriate. I approve of that description. But yeah, if you've never played Splatterhouse, if you've never even experienced this like if you've never had a chance to experience this game, I highly recommend you obviously play it if you can. Like even on an emulator, I think it would probably work decently well. But if nothing else, watch playthroughs. Like look at screenshots. This game is worthy of just being admired.
And the best thing is there's so many ways to actually play the original these days now. It's like ever since the 2010 game, when Namco officially got the code back for it, it's like they've been re-releasing it as part of, like it's on the Switch. You can buy those little standalone arcade games, have it on there. It's in a few other places too. It's really all over the place now.
Yeah, I remember, wasn't it? Because I remember it was on the Wii eShop at one point, and I think it was the only M-rated game on the eShop for like for a while or something like that.
They still put Splatterhouse 2 up on there.
That's right.
I did want to bring up one other thing I thought about regarding that warning from the cover of the TurboGrafx game. When the 2010 game was being promoted, Namco actually latched back onto that and started putting on stuff like a T-shirt mainly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you can actually, if you look on eBay for Splatterhouse t-shirts, it's a black one. It's got a picture of the new Terror Mask, and it actually has that warning on there.
Oh my god. I am going to write that down because I need that t-shirt.
And
that's a thing that I need.
One other thing, too, when I was working on the Guide to Retro Horror, I asked Kurt if I could write the outside copy on the book. So he said, yeah, sure, go ahead and make it seem like it's like the back of a VHS tape, like you're describing a movie. So I came up with this description that was kind of mixed a little bit of Splatterhouse, Ghosts and Goblins, and some other stuff. And then went into proud to present the Guide to Retro Horror, covers all this in here. And then at the very end, it's like, but be warned, the horrifying theme of this book may be inappropriate for young children and cowards. So
I want to adapt. I want to adopt that as sort of a mantra to my life.
There you go.
I think that it could work to inspire me to reach for the highest of heights.
Yeah, the horrifying theme of this life may be inappropriate. Period.
Exactly, especially for cowards. One last thing I wanted to talk about before we sort of wrap up our discussion on number one is the story. Like, I have a short blurb that I'd like to read about the story, and Rob, you can correct me if I miss anything.
Go right ahead.
But here's the basic plot of Splatterhouse. The story revolves around a main character, Rick Taylor, aka you, and his girlfriend Jennifer Willis, who end up trapped inside West Mansion, also known as a Splatterhouse. Also, a thing I did not know. I did not know that West Mansion was called the Splatterhouse. I don't know if that's correct or not.
It's here's where we kind of start running into differences between the Japanese and the American release.
I see.
In the American release, if you look inside the TurboGrafx manual, it has this whole story, and it starts off with it was called West Mansion, but to those who knew the legend, called it Splatterhouse, and it goes into a little bit about Dr. West. But in the Japanese manual, it's only represented by a short comic showing West and Rick and Jennifer, and there's some text I've never had translated, but I should look into that. But go on.
Okay, so that's sort of an addition to the translation.
Exactly, and things get more out there when you get into the sequels, but we'll cover that later.
Yeah. So Rick and Jennifer go to search for the renowned parapsychologist Dr. West. Jennifer is kidnapped upon their arrival. Rick is killed and then revived by the Terror Mask, which is in the Japanese release is a white hockey mask, which looks entirely like Jason Voorhees. In the American release, they changed the mask color to red to avoid copyright. In the European version, oh wait, there is no European version because TurboGrafx didn't come out in Europe. Duh. In the arcade version, is it white or is it red?
It looks more like Jason than ever in the arcade.
Okay,
yeah.
Sweet.
That red mask was exclusive.
I'm glad that the arcade people didn't care. They were just like, just make it white.
Like, whatever.
So Rick goes on the adventure to save Jennifer. Eventually, Rick finds Jennifer and she becomes transformed into this giant monster and tries to kill Rick. Spoiler warnings ahead. You are forced to kill Jennifer, who transforms back to normal after you defeat her. Rick then discovers that the mansion itself is alive and produces a fetus-like monster, which is, again, amazing, which you have to defeat to destroy the actual mansion. And then after that, you have to fight a final boss called Hell Chaos, which shatters the mask to free Rick from its influence. Obviously, like any good slasher movie, the mask then reassembles itself and begins laughing as the credits roll. I love this story. I think it's perfect for what it's not Shakespeare, obviously, but it's perfect for what they want to do, which is like give the feel of that like B slasher movie sort of vibe. And the fact that you end up killing your girlfriend who you've been trying to save this whole time really is like a sort of twist that I didn't expect in games of this vintage, like it's not something that I think a lot of games were doing is like this is what you thought it was, but it's not what you thought it was, and now you've done the thing that you didn't want to do.
It was probably the most surprising twist in a video game story since Samus Aran took off her helmet.
Exactly.
So there were no games I could think of where you rescue the girl and all of a sudden she turns into a monster and you have to kill her.
And you have to murder her, yes.
And the whole time, what makes it even worse is that every time she transforms back into herself, she's begging with you just to kill her. Don't leave her like this. Help me, Rick.
Yeah, she says, "Help me," and I'm like, "Ooh, that's a sting a little."
In the TurboGrafx game, all she ever says is "help me," but in the arcade, she actually has more to say. Like at the end when you finally do, and she collapses, and she just kind of, thank you, goodbye, and then she's gone.
Yeah, this is one thing I wanted to talk about because Rob, I know you've talked to us like about your experiences sort of playing Splatterhouse for the first time. I'm going to tell you what I thought. When I first played it, I thought it looked amazing. I thought it sounded amazing. I was really engaged. And then it kicked my ass like few games have ever kicked my ass. Like, I think I've made it past the first boss one time.
And that's the easiest one.
I know. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I know I'm not great at video games, but this game, like, is just punishing. But there's something about it, specifically the first one. We'll get to the later two entries, but the first one just makes me want to keep trying. Yeah. To get further and sort of see a little bit more of it. But this game is, I mean, come prepared, because this game is not going to hold your hand. This game is not, going to take it easy on you.
One thing that, especially Splatterhouse 1 and 2 have been criticized for is that it's got a lot of memorization-based patterns.
Yes.
So someone once said you could program a controller to go through these games and it would do it perfectly.
Yeah, I was going to say, that was one thing that I noticed when I played 2, is that when I got to that first boss, I was like, oh, there's a pattern here. And then when I memerized the pattern, I was like, okay, I did it. But then it's sort of, the levels are so long. I mean, we'll talk about it. We'll get into it. But Splatterhouse 1 did not make it very far. Found it very enjoyable what I did play. What I've obviously seen other people play it. I've seen, the completion of the story. And it's very enjoyable. I think Splatterhouse is one of those games, in my opinion at least, that you can have. It's very fun to play. It's very frustrating at times, which, I mean, par for the course in this era. I feel like you could point to a lot of games that people really love that are incredibly frustrating if you just haven't mastered it through playing it so much. But Splatterhouse is a game that's also very enjoyable to watch and experience, to see somebody else play.
This is true.
Anthony, what did you think? What was like your first impression when you finally played it?
It was the same thing you said. Like, the first thing I noticed was like the patterns.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I just hadn't seen anything like that in so long, where it's like, oh, memory, okay, blah blah blah, right? It tells you a lot about the time, because back then clearly, people used to read the manual to these games, and unless you read the manual to the game, the game starts on the TurboGrafx. I'm talking about. You start playing, it has no context. It's just a mansion, and then you just go on a killing spree. In the arcade, though, you actually get more context, though. Like, they run into the mansion and whatnot. But when I started playing it, though, I was just kind of like, it's funny to play these things now, and just, because you're going through the level, you're smashing everybody, and you're like, this is what people were so worked up about. Like, but times have changed, man. We've been desensitized.
It's like Bart Simpson said that first Treehouse of Horror when they were talking about the Raven.
Yeah.
And so it's like Friday the 13th Part 1, pretty tame by today's standards.
Right? Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, I'm with you on that though, Arnie. Like you already mentioned, but like the game, you're playing it. Here we are at 2020. I'm playing this game, and I'm like, it's, to me, I say this all the time. There's something about that era, that 16-bit era, that those games just hold up so damn well, man. And playing this game, you could, as hard as it is, you'd still want to play the game. Yeah. And it's still visually appealing enough that you still want to play through the game. Yeah.
Let me ask you this, Rob. I know that obviously you love this game and this series. Was the difficulty in Splatterhouse ever was that ever something that sort of got to you or ever bothered you about the game at all? Or were you just like, I love this so much, and you just sort of powered through it and memorized it and got good, as the kids say?
Yeah, it was more of I'm going to beat the crap out of this game. I will say that the difficulty didn't really get me until about stage 6.
Okay.
When you actually have to go into the womb and fight Mother.
Yes, that's right.
That boss battle, when the egg obas are just jumping everywhere and you're trying to stay on top of things, and it is, I've considered it for the longest time to be the most frustrating Splatterhouse level ever in any of the games.
Yeah. That's why I sort of feel a deep pang of shame when I tell you that I've barely made it past the first boss, because I know that you've, beaten this game on multiple occasions.
Yeah, but it's one of those things. Once you go ahead and you get the pattern down, see where the body eaters are going to be jumping, or war worms, depending on what you want to call them, you'll blow right through it.
Yeah.
Just make sure you don't get surprised by the corpse at the end of the battle.
That is the one thing, too, that I feel like you could say about a lot of games like Splatterhouse, is that, yes, it's hard. Yes, there's a lot of memorization involved, but those moments where you know what's going to happen, you anticipate, you deflect, you sort of stop, you feel like such a badass. Mm-hmm. You feel so cool as Rick, just like, punching this, punching that, killing this, doing that. So when it finally all comes together and works, the feeling is incredible. It's just everything leading up to that point.
I do.
And I tell you, there's certain parts of the first game that really stood out to me. And one of them was I love that. I think it was the third level, Rob, maybe keep me honest on this. Okay. The third level where he's walking down the hallway with those mirrors.
That's stage 4, the mirror Rick.
Stage 4, okay. Yeah, I love that. I just love that. I love that the reflection, because that was kind of a cool thing back then to see something like that, Mm-hmm. And the end boss, though, I thought that was pretty cool too. The way he's just reaching out from the screen.
Yeah.
Like, I thought those were some things, some tricks that I really hadn't really seen back then. And to see them now, it's still impressive.
And regarding Hell Chaos, I do want to thank you for something here. Mm-hmm. Because there was a soundtrack rip that I uploaded to West Mansion years ago.
Yeah.
For the original arcade game. I never bothered to change any of the file names, but the person that ripped it didn't know the names of the characters. And called Hell Chaos's theme, he called it Requiem for Captain Mozzarella.
Hell yes.
And so I'm seeing this Captain Mozzarella stuff popping up all over the internet, all over YouTube. And it's like, no, it's called Hell Chaos. It's one of those little things that's kind of a pet peeve for me.
Oh,
so thank you for calling him by his actual name.
That's amazing. I appreciate it, and I also regret that I did not call him Captain Mozzarella.
Okay, I'll go ahead and put my pet peeve aside if you'd like to refer to him as such now. But there was another thing I wanted to say about the original Splatterhouse. Mm-hmm. It was the moment that sold me on it.
Yeah.
Because at that point, I mean, I talked about Haunted House there, but one of the games I didn't mention was Castlevania, the original. That's still my favorite game of all time, by the way.
Okay.
So I was really into like the side-scrolling horror stuff at the time when that came out. Mm. So of course I'm really intrigued when I see Splatterhouse for the first time, and I watch my friend play it.
Yeah.
His name was Quincy, and he gets the second stage or whatnot, and gives me a turn, and we're swapping back and forth until finally I make it to stage 3.
Okay.
Going through the woods, and at this point I'm like, this game is really cool. If I ever get a TurboGrafx, I should probably pick it up. And then I reach the boss, Biggie Man. The dude with the chainsaw hands.
Hell yeah.
The music changed. He storms out from the right side of the screen. And my jaw just dropped. It's like, oh, shit. Pardon me. But it was like, at that point, it was like, I am sold forever on this game. Truth be told, when I bought a Splatterhouse, when I bought a TurboGrafx, that was the first game I picked up. Not going to lie.
Yeah, I mean, there's always, I feel like everybody has that moment for for like a game they really love. It's like you can sort of pinpoint the exact moment where you went from like, oh, this game's pretty good, to like, I love this. And Splatterhouse for me had a couple of those moments where I was just like, I can't believe they did this, like on the TurboGrafx 16. It's just to wrap things up here. On this segment, the arcade game, TurboGrafx 16 console port, were received generally well upon their release at the time. Most people obviously praising the graphics and the music, which we've talked about how excellent both of those things are. It did eventually get a Wii Virtual Console release in 2007, but it wasn't received as favorably. And I saw a lot of people, just a lot of reviewers sort of talking about how, I think partially the difficulty was one thing, the memorization was one thing. They said it seemed outdated, and just the fact that Splatterhouse doesn't hold up. I tend to disagree. I think that as I've already mentioned, I think that this is definitely a fun game. It's one that back then as now I think stands out, especially amongst its sort of counterparts at the time, like horror games during this time period. Splatterhouse, I would probably put head and shoulders above almost anything else I can think of in that genre. But I wanted to ask you, Rob, obviously you really enjoy the game, but what would you tell someone to convince them to play Splatterhouse now that had never sort of grown up with it, or, had never played it, was just interested in trying to get back into it?
I think it would basically depend on how they felt about horror.
Okay.
Because that would be the big selling point right there.
Yeah.
As Corpse Monger once said, it's like this game, he was talking about the 2010 game, but it applies to all of them. Mm-hmm. It's like this game is made for who it is made for. Those who get it, get it.
Yeah.
So, but, if someone's also, say, a big fan of Kung Fu Master, and it's like, you like that and horror, I got a game for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the best way to put it. What about you, Anthony? I just want to get some final thoughts on, what do you think of Splatterhouse? Do you think it holds up like nowadays?
Yeah, I think it holds up. It's a lot of people, they want to go and play a game that's 30 years old and compare it to something they've seen after the fact or even current. And I'm not with that thought process. I'm always, you got to transport yourself into the time when this game was released and think about it in terms of like what we were seeing back then. And I think when you do that, you really appreciate the game more. There's a lot to love about this game, a lot of the special effects, what the hardware was really doing. And yeah, I think people just need to get out of their own way and just enjoy the game for what it was and what it is right now.
Exactly.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And with that, we're going to take a very brief break, and we'll be back to talk more Splatterhouse. All right, see you in a bit.
So, you want to know the story of Splatterhouse, the new horror video game for TurboGrafx 16? They say he stalks the old haunted mansion. They say he's looking for his girlfriend. They say his only weapon against the maggot-eating ghouls who took her is a 2x4. And you say you want to play this game? Splatterhouse. Only for the TurboGrafx 16 system from NEC.
And we're back. We're still busting heads and decapitating monsters over here. We're going to jump into Splatterhouse Wanpaku Graffiti, but before we do, over the break, Rob was kind enough to tell me that I'd actually missed out on a couple of ports for the original Splatterhouse that I do want to mention because I think it's important to realize, the entire history of where this thing was released and how sort of Namco pushed it a lot. So you were telling me, Rob, about two ports that we didn't talk about. One was the FM Towns port and the other one was a Windows port.
Yes, both of those.
Okay. And I know you mentioned, you had told me the Windows port was basically a straight emulation of the arcade game on Windows just for Japan, but the FM Towns port was a little bit more interesting. Could you tell me a little bit about, that?
Right. That was released at the time the FM Towns computer was gaining some traction in Japan, right around the same time as the Sharp X68000.
Yep.
Which, if you ever saw that thing, but it's noted for its almost perfect arcade ports.
Yeah, it looks amazing.
Yeah. But the FM Towns had its share, and Splatterhouse was one of them.
Okay.
And it had a couple of unique display modes for it that were, practically almost HD at the time.
Oh, wow.
So, not quite, but, it was definitely about as close to arcade perfect you should get without owning the board.
Okay.
And the packaging was unique. It had a nice, exclusive artwork to that version, which was never seen anywhere else.
Oh, wow. And so is that like the big reason to own that version, because it has that artwork that you just can't find?
Yes. It's like on the cover, it has a headshot of Rick, which looks a lot like Jason Voorhees from his later zombie Jason days. And on the back, it's got this really great picture of West Mansion.
Okay. I think I've discovered the reason why that artwork was not seen anywhere else. It's probably some copyright issues.
Yeah, but if you try and get a complete copy of that these days, the prices are insane.
I can't imagine.
I've seen copies that go for well over $1,000.
Jesus.
Mm-hmm. So in comparison, the Windows one isn't that bad.
Yeah.
Even though there's two packaging variants on that. You've got a jewel case and a DVD case for it.
Okay.
So, and there was one other Splatterhouse game that was released, which you don't really hear about. Mainly due to the nature of what it was. It was an LCD handheld game.
there's just so many like series like this where you dig and dig and dig, and then you're like, oh, I must have found everything, and then you're like, no, there's this obscure little thing from like, you know, this one area of Japan that was released from like 1989 to like 1990, and like 2 stores carried it, and you're like, oh my god, now I gotta find this other thing.
Yeah,
that's what I love about video game history. It never ends. It's a weaving tapestry that goes on forever.
And I'm looking at a picture of the handheld right now, and it's so amazing. It's got like that one red button on the right side. Like that's it. You have this button.
Yep,
that's it.
That's it, pretty much.
Awesome.
But I tell you, the sound is grating on that. Just absolutely grating.
I can only imagine. So Splatterhouse 1 Paku Graffiti. Some of our listeners may have heard about this. I think that this is one that with like modern collecting culture, YouTube sort of blowing up a lot of video game reviewers, this is one that I think caught the attention of a lot of people. That's how I found out about it, was watching, I think it was Happy Video Game Nerd on YouTube is how I first heard about this. And so Splatterhouse 1 Paku Graffiti, released in Japan in 1989 for the Famicom, developed by Now Production, who also developed Splatterhouse 2 and 3 on the Sega Genesis. This is sort of a, what would you call this? Like a spin-off, a spiritual successor? I know some people call it a prequel to the original Splatterhouse.
It's kind of, just to use another comparison, it's to Splatterhouse what Parodius is to Gradius.
Okay.
So it's got like a kind of super deformed, cute take on the series.
Yeah. And so this was the first Splatterhouse game created exclusively for consoles, and the only one ever developed for a Nintendo console, which is interesting. It's technically the second game in the series chronologically, in that it came out after the original like arcade. But like we said, it's sort of its own little world. It focuses a lot more on platforming as opposed to the beat 'em up style. But I think the thing that people really like take away from this game when they talk about it is that it features parodies of horror movies and pop culture references. The one that sort of comes to mind, I think, is the first level boss. Is that the vampire who has a bunch of zombies and they dance to Thriller?
He's kind of a mini boss.
Yeah, that's right. But, you know, this thing is littered with just references to all sorts of horror movies, pop culture figures, and things like that. It's I don't know, it's weird to me because obviously this isn't a new concept. Like the super deformed concept is not new in gaming or in Japan at all. But this was one that I was like, wow, they really will do this to anything. You know, because usually when you get like a super deformed version of something, it's something that's not necessarily cute, but it's, you know, more normalized. It's like something like you said, like Gradius to Parodius or something like that. Whereas Splatterhouse is like the complete antithesis of what I would have thought would get a super deformed version. Like it's graphic, it's gory, it's horror, you know, it's very extreme, quote unquote. Which I think makes me love it even more. The fact that it feels like the redheaded stepchild of this series that in itself is probably also a redheaded stepchild.
That's
just makes it like so much more, you know, just endearing.
I will say one thing about One Paku Graffiti. For a few years after my daughters were born, that was the only Splatterhouse game I would play around them. Okay. And they loved it. And I got a similar story involving Splatterhouse too. We'll get to that later.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one I'm just going to be completely honest. Never played it. Never even got close to playing it. Would love to own it. It's like one of those. I've never been a huge importer per se, but this is one that I've always been like, man, I would love to get a copy of One Paku Graffiti in my hands and be able to play it with an actual controller.
It's no, I mean, I feel the same way. I'm watching the gameplay. Like I've never played this game, and I'm watching this, and I'm just like, oh, this is so fun. This was like so much fun right now. It's like the perfect balance after playing a mainline Splatterhouse game, and then you just need to kind of decompress and just chill. Yeah. You play this is what
you play,
you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's definitely a lot more in the way of platforming than the other games are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
right.
Absolutely. I was gonna say, Rob, I wanted to ask your thoughts on this game. I know you've played it as compared to other entries in the franchise. How do you feel about Wanpaku Graffiti? Like, do you consider it, part of the franchise, like in the same way you talk about 1, 2, or 3, or even the remake, or does it sort of sit in its own lane?
Well, being it as it's kind of a side story, super deformed, and even possibly a prequel, depending on one of the endings you get. I still consider it part of the series. I think it's just as valid as the others. Okay. But it definitely is in a league of its own.
Yeah.
And in fact, though, I strongly felt that it should have come to the U.S. at one point. So much that I pitched it to the producer of the 2010 game. Like, basically begged him, you have to include this.
Yeah.
You have to. And he's like, well, we considered it, but it doesn't really fit the tone of what we're doing with the new one. So it's like, that would have been its first official release and everything.
I know, that was a shame because I would have loved to have, in any form, just a way to play Wanpaku Graffiti without emulating it. I understand the reasoning behind that, but I think I sit in your camp where I'm like, just throw it on there,
Exactly.
You could have even made it like a little hidden unlockable that you have to do something extra special to find. Yeah. But I don't know. That makes me a little sad that we haven't gotten Wanpaku yet.
I will say, though, that my copy is definitely one of the prize items in my collection. Like I said at the beginning of the show, it was the inspiration for actually getting off my butt and starting West Mansion.
Yeah.
So it's one of those games I will do my best to never part with. Yeah,
it really is one that I think anybody who has it in their collection, it just sort of stands out, and I think it's one of those that you could get anybody to play and they'd have fun with it, just like no explanation needed. Let's just pop this in. I know you're going to get some of these references. It's cute, it's fun, it's colorful. It makes for a good sit down play session with even people who aren't necessarily gamers, quote unquote. But that's about all I could say about Wanpaku. It's an interesting footnote in Splatterhouse's history, and I'm glad that it's around. So unless I'm missing anything, unless you guys want to add anything here at the end, I think we can move on to Splatterhouse 2.
Well, I do want to add just a couple things. For one thing, if you ever do locate yourself a complete copy, make sure it has the sticker sheet included.
Oh, there's a sticker sheet.
Yes, I got a nice big scan of it on West Mansion if you want to take a look at it.
I kind of do. This is a thing now that's also making me very... You keep bringing up all my like gaming insecurities, but one that happened recently was as I'm organizing my collection. That's a project I'm going through now. But nowadays with these, especially with the modern games, like some of them have manuals, some of them have inserts, some of them have nothing. And I just don't know which is which anymore, and it drives me insane. I'm like, is there something I'm missing in this game? Like, whenever I go to buy a used game now, I'm just like, is this everything? Like, is there like a registration card of like some obscure magazine that I'm not finding, or is there like some temporary tattoo that should have been here?
Listen, man, the stickers that came with a lot of these older games are worth more than the actual games.
Sometimes. Yeah. That's true. I remember, I think it's Punisher on the Genesis has like a temporary tattoo that people lose their mind over.
That thing goes for like, I think about $300 just for this temporary tattoo you're never going to use, but it just makes your copy complete.
Oh
yep. Damn. It's like, I bought Captain America and the Avengers for the Genesis a year or two back.
Yep.
And it was complete except for the little collector's pin.
Yep.
I went and looked up the pin. I could buy 4 complete copies of the game for the price of the pin.
For the price of the pin.
Are you serious?
Yes.
You know what's crazy, Rob? I have the pin. I never got rid of my copy of Captain America and the Avengers.
Hold on to it then.
I still have my pin. I shouldn't say this on a broadcast.
I also used to have a Rocket Knight Adventures collector card that was a promo when the game came out. And somewhere along the line it vanished. I have no idea what happened to it. I've never even seen it for sale anywhere.
I feel so bad for the adult who owns a copy of Punisher that he bought when he was a child, but he used the temporary tattoo on himself.
Well, it could be worse. They could have bought Gunstar Heroes and saved the fruit roll-up inside.
Oh. How much is that fruit roll-up worth, though?
I don't know, but I wouldn't want to eat it.
Because I will sell it.
I don't know. Did that have special branding? Yeah, I have no idea.
Oh my god. But yeah, so moving on to Splatterhouse 2. Obviously, sequel to Splatterhouse 1, released in 1992 on the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive for all our European listeners. It's also released on the Virtual Console in 2008, making it the only M-rated game on the Virtual Console. I think we had talked about that previously. Again, this box art, look it up. It's I would argue maybe my favorite of the three.
I have to offer a dissenting opinion here. You're talking about the one from the American and European release, right?
Yes.
Where Rick's got the skull mask and it looks like there's an alien from the Alien movies there.
Yes.
Yeah. Basically.
Yes. Just an actual xenomorph that they've drawn on this cover.
I think it's supposed to be a screaming Mimi, but I am not a fan of that artwork. Never have been. Except for the zombies in the back.
I do like the zombies in the back. I also like the spooky ghost that's flying overhead.
Oh, the one with the big puffy eyebrows?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I've always liked the Japanese Mega Drive cover more. It's just a little more Splatterhouse in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a little more. I think it follows the theme of the first game much better than this American one. I don't know what they were going for with this cover, to be completely honest with you. Because like you said, it just seems to be sort of a departure from the vibe of the first game. But you know, the second game, sort of direct sequel to the first, takes place 3 months after the events of the first game. The Terror Mask reappears to Rick and tempts him to return to West Mansion in order to rescue Jennifer. Rick discovers a new mansion, which they call the Hidden House. I think I got this off of your website, that this was like a translation from the Japanese.
Yep, in the Mega Drive version, it's called the Hidden House.
That's
but
right.
They dropped that in the U.S. version.
Yes.
In fact, one of the things I had to clear up when I was running West Mansion was people thought that the Hidden House was actually West Mansion somehow magically rebuilt.
Yes.
But it's like, no, you watch the opening, you see the ruins of West Mansion off in the distance, and then scrolls over and there's the Hidden House.
They just pan over and it's like, and this is the guest house.
Exactly.
Yeah, so eventually you rescue Jennifer and you sink in, and you watch the Hidden House sink into a river. You know, it's really, if you like Splatterhouse, more of the same but better. You know, like I've talked on this podcast before of games that when they make sequels, they don't necessarily try to reinvent everything. They sort of take what works, they take what was good, and they refine it. And I think that's what Splatterhouse 2 does more than anything. It takes a lot of what was good about Splatterhouse 1 and makes it better. You still have the really good graphical, you know, presentation, good music, a lot of splattering, a lot of weapons, a lot of fighting, gore, blood, guts. Everything you loved about it is still here, but, you know, upped a little bit to the nth degree now that you've got a machine like the Genesis sort of going full bore on this.
Fun fact, too. This was the only Splatterhouse game where you could ever actually use a chainsaw until the 2010 game.
Yep. Which surprised me when I read about that, because I don't know why. I think I must have just, you know, like that, what do they call it, the Mandela effect? I think I just superimposed chainsaws into every memory I've had about Splatterhouse 1 and 3.
Yeah.
Because if you had asked me, I would have been like, yes, you can. Absolutely.
I'm digging this Mega Drive cover just because it's like, it looks like Casper went on they started doing crack, and now he's just evil, and the xenomorph is pink.
That is a great description of that ghost. I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, feel free.
This is
a pink xenomorph, crack-headed Casper the Ghost, and
one of
this octopus.
Yeah, one of the tentacles from Day of the Tentacle.
Yeah.
Which also, the one thing we didn't talk about this cover is that Rick is like straight up wearing mom jeans and a giant belt buckle, which is his shirt is tucked into, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, that's true.
I always thought he was wearing, like in the game, he's wearing like a jumpsuit, right? He's wearing like a...
They're more like hospital scrubs.
Yeah, sort of like a janitor's, you know, sort of outfit. So I really don't... I feel like this cover was one of those where they sent the artist like a vague description of the game, and he sort of drew from that instead of ever seeing... This is like a Mega Man situation, is what I'm trying to say.
If you want an even better example of that, did you ever see the old magazine Turbo Play?
No, I did not.
I have scans of this up on West Mansion. The artwork that was done for their original Splatterhouse article.
Oh, really?
It's like it comes from an alternate universe. It's got a slime green Splatterhouse logo. It's got Rick wearing a regular hockey mask and the skin tight purple shirt, and he's holding like a Beretta.
Oh my god! What?
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
And then the enemies are like Michael Myers and Jenny the Lizard Queen. That's the best I can say.
I want to play that game.
Yeah, it's like, meanwhile, in an alternate universe.
I was about to say, on Earth 76, this is the Splatterhouse they got.
Yeah. It was literally just a case of, it's got a dude in a mask. He looks like that Jason guy, and just give him a gun and put some harder stuff in there, and we'll work with it.
Don't worry, I got it, boss. You're gonna love it. But yeah, I mean, outside of the obviously graphical improvements, some gameplay changes, more chainsaws, Splatterhouse 2 just really, I feel like, very effortlessly sort of follows the first game. Like, if you played these back to back, I feel like you wouldn't really miss a beat. And I know like I said, I played Splatterhouse 2. I made it as far as the second boss. And then I got destroyed, but I loved every second of it. It's just I don't even know how to describe it. I think just the graphical stylings of that game, like the series in general, just like, man, I just really enjoy looking at all this carnage and destruction. It's really weird. It doesn't turn you off. It's sort of designed in a way where it's very appealing to the eye, if that makes any sense.
Plus, there's some really good humorous touches in that, too.
Yeah.
It's like, just in the first stage alone, you have the one dead man who, it's like you're walking along, all of a sudden his chest starts to bulge and a boreworm pops out. Yep. And then when you get to the boss, there's two dead men who are in there, and they're like, what do we do? What do we do? And the other one comes in, he's coming! And they run and get eaten by the
boss.
Giant thing. Yeah. Can't remember his name.
There's definitely a lot of, like, funny... writing isn't really the word because there's barely any words, right? But there's definitely like a lot of physical skit humor going on in some of these, which I appreciate a whole lot. I love a little bit of humor mixed into my horror. Aside from obviously what we've talked about in playing Splatterhouse 2, Rob, how do you, like, in your personal canon, I guess, like in your personal rankings, how does 2 stack up to 1?
I think 1's superior.
Okay.
Yeah. I love 2, don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. In fact, I remember when I found it was out, I still didn't have a turbo at the time. Mm-hmm. But it's like all of a sudden, there's a Splatterhouse for Genesis. Gotta have it. Okay, what can I sell? So, yeah, it's still a great game, but it just not quite as good. Okay. In my opinion. As far as, well, the story's one thing. The graphics were perfectly acceptable, but I hate the mask in the US version. It's just so dull, generic. It's like, it's a skull. Yay.
Yeah, it kind of looks like his face was just like burnt off with acid.
Exactly. So it's like, if you look at the Japanese version, it looks like a kind of a white version of the TurboGrafx mask. Mm-hmm. Or almost like a kabuki kind of thing.
Yeah.
But either way, it's just cooler looking.
Yeah. What about you, Anthony? I know I don't know if you ever got to play Splatterhouse 2. Was it a game that you like heard about, like the same way you heard about 1? Because I know you had a Genesis at this point.
Yeah, this was my gameplay time with this has been it's fairly limited, but it wasn't anything back then that I was like eager to play.
Okay,
it wasn't at the time. Anyway, at the time, it was one of those weird just from a point of view of just seeing the box art on the shelf, it was like kind of weird because it was like this blue, and I was like, "What? Why is this blue? This looks different than everything else on the shelf."
Yeah.
But as far as the game though, like finally getting to play it though, I agree with you again, Arnie. Like it was a perfect just continuation. They didn't, like you said, they didn't try to reinvent it. The graphics were a little bit better. You could tell the Genesis horsepower, like the parallax as you're scrolling, through the screen. They added little touches and stuff. But other than that, I'm looking at my notes here, and it's like I found funny things, like I think the stage 5 boss, I was like, why is Dr. Manhattan in this game? Why is he chasing Rick? But,
the evil one.
Other than that, yeah, I found it to just be like perfect, a good evolution of the series.
Yeah.
The style, just in terms of just the style, more things, more weapons, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, Rob. It's interesting to say, like what you're saying, that you like the first one better. I just felt like this felt more like, okay, this is a perfect sequel to me. Perfect in terms of like, this is what you want a sequel to be, not go crazy, try to reinvent things, try to add more things. This is just like, yeah, like you said, Arnie, it's like you could play these back to back and feel like, yeah, okay.
Oh, in that regard, I definitely agree. It's I have no problem with the gameplay, the sound. It's just I just didn't like it as much.
Yeah,
but I still love the game.
Yeah.
So if that makes sense. Speaking of the weapons, though, it's like there was one moment in the game that just I had to pause it because I was laughing so hard. The stage where you're going down the dock and the Leviathan's chasing you, and if you look real close, there's actually a boat oar you can pick up. It passes by real quick, so if you miss it, it's gone. But you pick it up, and there's dead men in front of you coming towards you. And if you whack them, there's no wall for them to splatter against, so they go flying way off into the background and just splash in the water. First time I saw that, I just had pause and control. I was about
That's
dying.
an awesome little touch. That's such a cool little touch. I'm gonna have to go back and look at that, because that's a really neat little touch. That seems like that's one of those things where it's like, there was just one programmer who was like, we should put a weapon here, and they were like, no, because like then we'd have to make a whole new animation. He's like, no, we need to do this. It'll be hilarious.
It's like little hidden comedic stuff like that. Like we didn't touch on. We were talking about One Pocket Graffiti, but the demon plunger in the game.
Oh yes.
I made an Instagram post about that a while back, and it's like a possessed plunger which unplugs the toilet, and like little turds swarm all at you. So here come the turds.
I think that's part of it. We've discussed this a lot, and I think the fact that Splatterhouse sort of has this, like, up front, if you just look at the cover of the first game, and it's like, you see the warning label, you see the blood, you see the chainsaw man, you see Rick coming, you're like, man, this game is like hardcore. This game is going to be sort of like fucking scary. And on the surface, like when you play it, you're like, oh yeah, there's blood, guts, gore everywhere. But the fact that they don't take themselves too seriously, that they're sort of in on the joke, right? They're sort of like any good B slasher movie. They're like, we know this isn't winning any Oscars. Like, we're just having fun with this. You can really tell the creators are having fun. And I think when you see a developer having fun and it comes through, it makes you sort of more into, like, more, it makes me at least more inclined to want to play it and continue playing it and sort of exploring it and finding, what else have they hidden around here? What else have they done?
Yeah, it's like something that the developers definitely took from watching a lot of those slasher movies. Well, Evil Dead.
That's right.
Evil Dead was such straight horror, and then 2 comes out, and it's like, wow, this is great because it's comedy and horror.
That's right. Evil Dead 2, man, that's top 5 horror movies for me of all time, undoubtedly. Love that movie, and I think if anything, Wampaka Graffiti is the Evil Dead 2 of the Splatterhouse franchise.
You may be more right than you know. There's actually a very direct Evil Dead reference in that.
Oh, really?
In the last stage, there's a room that's on fire. And you'll notice when you go in there, there's a deer head trophy on the wall.
Oh.
If you get injured, it starts laughing at you.
Oh, I never got that far.
I saw the deer heads on the wall, and I don't know, for whatever reason, it just something it made me look at it. I was like, wow, that's really interesting. These deer heads on the wall.
Yeah, I know. I thought about that in the remake. I don't know if this was a reference or not, but in the remake, I think in like the second or third room you go into, there's like, it's not a deer, but it's like a mounted head on a wall that starts laughing at you before like a bunch of monsters come in. And I was like, oh, that seems like an Evil Dead reference to me.
It was. The team definitely said they had to draw a lot of inspiration from Evil Dead.
Yeah. So, that's where it is. Splatterhouse 2. Great sequel. If you can, play it. Do yourself a favor. And now we're going to move into Splatterhouse Numero Tres.
Real quick, though. if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Before we do that, I don't know if you remember during Splatterhouse, I was mentioning something about the story, like kind of diverging from the U.S. and the Japanese releases as time went on. Splatterhouse 2 is where that really started to pick up, because the story they included in the U.S. version was something Namco America just totally made up. All the stuff about Dr. Muller and like how he's found this mask, and like no mention of Dr. West, no nothing. It's just like it totally diverged. And even in the game, there's stuff that happens where it's like, okay, that's apropos of nothing. Like at one point, Rick has this diary. It lets him open up a portal to the void, and it's like, where'd that come from? It's never mentioned before. It's never mentioned again.
So this is all sort of the creation of Namco America, basically. Like whoever did the translation or ported it over to North America, like they just created that whole lore.
Well, the part about Muller and all that, definitely.
Oh, okay,
yes.
gotcha.
The diary is in the original Japanese game, but since I haven't had any of those cutscenes translated, I'm not sure exactly what's going on. They may have mentioned it earlier, but the American one, it's just there, and then you never hear about it again.
Yeah, it just sort of comes out of left field, and it's like, well, my time is done, and leaves. That's amazing.
So I think it gets even more into Splatterhouse 3 where the stories diverge.
I know. Well, this is where I had written a lot of the story stuff, again, from West Mansion, like a really good resource for a lot of that stuff. But Splatterhouse 3, this one, no European release, only North America and Japan, 1993, Sega Genesis Mega Drive. One of the first games rated by Sega's Video Game Rating Council, which was rated MA13. I find it really interesting that their mature rating. Was there another one above MA13? I don't know if you guys know offhand.
I think they had some kind of adult.
I think that was it. Yeah.
They never used it, but I think they had one that was like kind of 17 plus.
Gotcha. That's what I love, that they're like the one that they're like, yeah, this game is like not for children unless you're 13 or older. Then clearly you're okay. As I said, no European release until it was included as an unlockable extra in the 2010 Splatterhouse remake, which I thought was really cool because finally they, if there was any Splatterhouse fans out there, now they don't have to import a copy of this game. They can just go out and get the 2010 remake. I'm sure it's much more affordable than getting Splatterhouse 3. And so I have the cover for this one up as well. This one, I will say, I don't like it as much as 2. This is probably my least favorite cover if I had to pick one.
By far, yeah.
Well,
like Splatterhouse, the Splatterhouse 2 cover had a fake xenomorph, and on this one, it looks like Rick is turned into the Predator.
Yes.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from there. And, you see that Rick has his axe raised. He's ready to go ahead and use the axe that never appeared in the game. It's like the most inaccurate part of that cover. But something else unique about that is it's the only one where the artwork was the same on both versions.
This is the only Splatterhouse where the Japanese cover is the same as this.
Exactly the same. And I don't know if you noticed or not, but that was actually painted by a really well-respected professional artist who did a lot of fantasy artwork and other game covers too.
Yeah.
It was Julie Bell.
Oh, okay. I mean, the style, in terms of like the drawing itself, it's gorgeous. Mm-hmm. Like it looks like a movie poster, essentially. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I feel like there's something about the first one that just, I like it more than this. But this is no slouch. I mean, if I had seen this again, like I think, like with 1, if I had seen this on a store shelf or a video rental place, this one would have come home with me. That would have been, like there's enough there that I'm like, I need to see what the context behind all of this that I'm seeing right now is. So Splatterhouse 3, again, sequel to Splatterhouse 2, obviously, but it takes place 5 years after the events of Splatterhouse 2. This is a thing I also like about this series, is that there's continuation. Like it's never like the story ends here and then the next game here's something completely different. Like all these stories connect and just form like one semi-cohesive narrative throughout. So it's kind of like, again, like when you're watching a series of movies that sort of play off of the events of previous movies. Rick and Jennifer finally married. Mazel tov, congratulations. And had a son named David. Rick has become successful on Wall Street. I don't think it's ever explained what he does. He's just on Wall Street.
That's because that was completely made up by Namco USA.
Ah, I see. Okay.
There's no mention of Wall Street or him buying a mansion or anything like that in the Japanese one at all.
Oh, really? See, this is amazing, because this story I was reading and I was like, man, this really went off the rails for a second. Like, Rick just he took all of his trauma and just channeled it into doing big business on Wall Street. And so he bought himself a mansion, according to Namco USA in Connecticut.
Yeah, see,
that's what I don't get. Like, what's wrong with this
exactly.
guy?
If I was Rick, I'd stay the hell away from mansions for the rest of my life.
It would only be appropriate for him to be living in a rundown shack with one room so he can see every wall in it at all times.
Or maybe a nice penthouse apartment in Manhattan if they're going to run with that Wall Street thing.
Yeah.
Right?
That's fair. Right? Which, whoever designed... his design for this mansion is insane.
Yes.
It makes no sense. There's 17 floors. There's 150 rooms in this mansion. So once again, Rick needs to stop the Terror Mask. Rick needs to use the Terror Mask to stop an evil being known as the Evil One, which I love that name. It's amazing.
That was the quote-unquote Dr. Manhattan from Splatterhouse 2.
Hell yeah. See? Continuity, people. This is what video games need. We need continuity. He's invaded the mansion, taken Jennifer and David. Rick eventually defeats him if you're good enough. If you're like me, Jennifer and David probably died. And the Terror Mask reveals its true intentions, so you have to defeat it once and for all. So right off the bat, here's the thing I like the most about Splatterhouse 3. There's 4 possible endings, depending on whether you save Jennifer, David, both of them, or none of them. Immediately when I read this, I was like, this is super cool. I need to play this right now. Because I feel like there just wasn't... with a lot of stuff that Splatterhouse has done, I feel like this just wasn't a thing that you saw in this era of gaming. That many alternate paths, that many alternate endings, all of which are affected by you being able to successfully navigate each level. Because it's not like there's just a specific level where it's save Jennifer, and if you save her, it's all right, Jennifer lives. It's no, Jennifer can die here, or she can die here, or she can die here. And same with David. There's just different story points where if you fail or succeed, it changes the narrative and changes the outcome.
The closest thing I could think to that would be the endings of Castlevania 2 and 3.
Yeah. But this is, I don't know, I feel like this is just... there was just something to this that I really latched onto. Because I agree with you, Castlevania 2 and 3 definitely have that sort of, alternate path, additional character stuff, whether you do certain things or don't do certain things affects, the endings. But Splatterhouse 3, man, I just think that's really ambitious.
Oh, yeah.
It just reeks of developers who really wanted to try to push the envelope. So, I don't know if we want to go through every ending, but suffice it to say, if both Jennifer and David die, it's sad. If Jennifer dies, it's sad. If David dies, it's sad. If they both live, it's happy, ?
Well, that's the only one where the mask actually dies.
Yes.
The other ones, he's kind of yeah, I'll be back.
Yeah,
Watch out.
I'm going to come back and kick your ass.
Exactly.
And so here's the other thing about Splatterhouse 3 is that unlike Splatterhouse 1 and 2, non-linear level design, this was the game we were talking about before, whereas Splatterhouse 2 sort of refined, Splatterhouse 1 didn't really make any changes. This game, keeps a lot of the fun combat, a lot of the graphical, features, a lot of the cool monster designs, but it's a completely different game. This is the one where I'm the beat 'em up label definitely applies here.
Oh yeah, they went full brawler. This is horror's answer to Streets of Rage.
Yeah, exactly. And for that, I do think, I don't know if this is a controversial opinion or not, but I think this was my favorite. This is the one I enjoyed playing the most.
I wouldn't say it's controversial.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the fighting. I enjoyed, you know, the sort of power ups that you get in the being able to Hulk out and just being super cool. You know, you can do throws as Rick, you can pick up weapons and fight. It's all super interesting. And there's special moves, things like that. You know, it's really something about it just made me like it more than the other two. I will say the timer induces stress levels in me that are not healthy.
You are not alone.
Yeah, this, if I had to compare the first two Splatterhouse games, like you just mentioned, Streets of Rage, it would be, those are Streets of Rage, and then this is like Streets of Rage 2.
Yeah.
Where they just added all this other stuff. I feel, and Rob, I don't know, like, because I'm looking at it from the perspective now, like, this was a good a move forward for the franchise in the terms of, like, they added enough stuff to keep it fresh. But did you feel like this was too much of a change, or did you think it was the right amount of change?
I will say, when I initially played it, and full disclosure, I actually, at the time, I was just out of high school and had just gotten fired from my most recent job, so I didn't have much in the way of money. Mm-hmm. So I traded away my entire Game Gear collection I had at the time just to get this.
Oh, wow.
And when I first played it, it was like, this is different. Mm-hmm. This is not, I was expecting like Splatterhouse 3 to be just like the first two, but I like this. it was definitely enough of a change. It got more people into it, because by 1993, the whole Kung Fu Master thing was pretty old. And on top of it, it kind of seems like it was only released a year after Splatterhouse 2.
Yeah.
So it leads me to believe that Splatterhouse 2 is kind of like a quickie sequel they put together while they were spending time developing 3. Mm-hmm. Because of all the extra stuff they put, they had to do, you know, they did all the digitized photos, so they had to arrange all that. They had to completely come up with a new game engine. And so it's like, let's test the waters with 2, and if that's successful, we'll throw 3 at them.
Yeah. And it keeps that. I mean, we've harped on it for forever now, it feels like, but the graphics on this thing are great.
Amazing.
You know, even more of what you love, more creepy monsters, more disgusting death animations. Even Rick, I have a screenshot of it in our notes, when he's doing his, like, I don't even know what you'd call it, if it's like a super move or what it is, but like fists like emerge. Fists like emerge from every part of his body, and you can see like each individual thing has like sinew and muscle, and like it looks so cool.
This is a really impressive Genesis game, looking Genesis game. I don't know what it is. It just looks like a lot more colorful than what you're used to seeing on a Genesis.
On top of that, this is the first one that people have said genuinely scared them.
I could see that.
Okay, so that's a great point, Rob, because I was thinking the same thing when I was watching the video and everything, because I kept thinking this is probably the scariest one out of all of them. And I think it had a lot to do with the cutscenes.
Yes, it did. Especially
the cutscenes. Ooh.
That one. Okay, because for anyone not familiar with how it goes, and at the end of the first stage, no matter what happens, you get to Jennifer, and if you're lucky enough to get there fast enough, then she's perfectly fine. You skip stage 2 and go right to stage 3. Mm-hmm. But any other time you make it to her, she's been infested by a boreworm. And as you go through stage 2, the cutscenes, and I play this really eerie music while this is going on, it basically tells you, it's like the boreworm moves under her skin, sending ghastly waves across her flesh. Yes. And it's like the boreworm is feasting on her brain. You see her there where it's like her brain starting to bulge out a bit.
Oh my God.
And it's like, you didn't save her.
Oh man, I'm watching this happen, and I'm just like, yo, this is really creepy. But it's like it's literally saying, the text is like, oh well, now it's eating her intestines. So
the one that gets everyone, though, without fail, is what happens after the boreworm's completely devoured her. She's become a mindless beast. And the picture you see of her with fangs bared, it just comes up out of nowhere. I've actually posted that image on West Mansion Facebook in the past, and people comment, it's like, I was just scrolling through my feed. Oh my God! It still has that power after all these years. The sad thing is when they had to do the 2010 game, and they included that in there, they had to replace the pictures.
Oh, really?
Because they didn't have the rights for the actors' likenesses anymore.
Oh.
So they did basically artwork based on them, and they're nowhere near as scary.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Oh, that sucks.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a reason to own the physical copy of Splatterhouse 3.
Well, let me go work some overtime somewhere and afford that bad boy.
There you go.
Yeah, it's not
On,
cheap.
on top of that, we haven't talked about it yet, but the mask.
Yeah.
Okay. For one thing, obviously, this game is like the most the mask ever talks to Rick.
Yep.
And basically instructs him. It's got more of an evil kind of side to it than the later snarkiness that comes along in the 2010 game. But if you look at the design, that is the most original design for the mask. And it's the one that carried over into the 2010 game.
Yeah.
I think it's the coolest one out of all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the third game definitely, to me, felt more connected to the 2010 game for that reason. Like that little, almost like the Venom in the Spider-Man comics, like that voice constantly talking to him and telling him what to do and stuff.
Yeah. And you mentioned about the plot at the beginning where you actually have to fight the mask this time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because the mask, you defeat the evil one, and it's like, good job for taking care of him for me. Now I can rule the world. And a couple friends of mine who are staff at the Light Short Cypher mainframe, which is a Strider website that I'm on staff at myself. I know I mentioned that before we started. One of them had never seen the ending of Splatterhouse 3.
Oh, really?
So the site's admin, Kenny, he was talking to her. He's like, it's a really cool battle because you have to fight the Terror Mask. And the other one, her name is Lepa. And she just responds with, oh, that's really, wait a minute. Does that mean you're like punching yourself in the face?
It's a fair question.
For the record, you're not punching yourself in the face. The mask actually takes its own form. It's like possesses what's left of the evil one's corpse, and
that's right.
Then turns into a giant terror mask that you can body slam. Very fun battle.
Awesome. And I did really enjoy that after 3 games, they finally, let you sort of fight the terror mask and end it. Like if you get the good ending, it finally brings a close to that story. I'm glad they didn't like leave it hanging up in the air, sort of like leave it a little open-ended. I'm glad that as a reward to people like yourself who've been following the series and playing all the games, I'm glad that, you can sort of see the end of that story out to its fullest conclusion.
Yeah, and I tell you, when Splatterhouse 2010 was initially announced, and they released some plot details about it, and people are like, Splatterhouse 4 is coming out. And it's like, no, this is not Splatterhouse 4. It's like the Back to the Future trilogy, okay? It's like the original trilogy is done. It's over. This is not a sequel. So stop calling it that.
Yeah. But that's the thing, right? There's so many video games that just sort of end, and there's no like true conclusion to it, either because they left it on a cliffhanger or because they just couldn't, whatever the planned or proposed sequel gets canceled for some reason or another. So it's nice to see that something like Splatterhouse sort of has that beginning, middle, end. And if you're somebody who wants to experience that, you can go and play through all 3 of them and get that sort of satisfaction of being like, I completed the story, it's done. And then if you want more of it, you can go play the remake as well.
Yep, and then there's one Paku to fully complete your fix.
That's right. There's one Paku that'll whatever leftover Splatterhouse want you have, one Paku will satisfy.
And of course, if you're still on Saturday, you can really dig deep and get that LCD game.
I want that button.
Oh no, that'll never end. So I guess before we close out on Splatterhouse 3, I wanted to get both of you guys' thoughts. You first, Rob. Like, same thing I asked you with Splatterhouse 2. Like, how did it stack up in your mind to 1 and 2? Like, where does it sort of land?
With me, I'd have to say I like it better than 2, but not as much as 1.
Okay.
But it's definitely got the actual horror / scare factor to it. The graphics and presentation, everything are just phenomenal.
Okay.
And I love the little hidden Easter eggs too, which you can see on West Mansion. Yeah.
Was it, in your opinion, was it a worthy end to the series?
Oh, definitely.
Okay. So if you hadn't gotten the remake, if you hadn't gotten any more Splatterhouse content, God forbid, for the rest of time, this would have been a good way for you to end on it, you think?
Oh, yeah. And actually, for the longest time, I was opposed to the idea of doing a sequel or a remake.
Okay.
I was just like, because I've seen what had happened. It's like they're just going to screw it up. Let's just leave it the way it was. It was perfect the way it was.
Okay.
What about you? Pleasantly proved wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy that they made a remake because now I get to play the originals as well. Like, we'll talk about that, but that's one of the high points for me of that release. What about you, Anthony? Like, what did you think of Splatterhouse 3 in comparison to the first two games?
I think you have to the first one has like that special feel to it. You know, it's like the first one and it set everything up. Splatterhouse 3 is definitely my second choice in that series. I just love how they just made everything just better. They evolved the gameplay, and I mean, it's the series in general, man. They did a really good job of just like evolving it little by little. But this is, especially for it being the last game in the trilogy, like they really wrapped it up nice, perfectly with better gameplay, more stuff to do. You know, like they just really, it just evolved. You can see the evolution of the series right here, just reach a pinnacle.
Yeah,
especially with the storytelling, with those cutscenes. Those cutscenes are scary, man.
Well, you know, I think that finally covers the mainline trilogy and Wanpaku. So we're going to take one more quick break, and then we're going to come back to talk about the 2010 Splatterhouse remake. That sound good to you guys?
Sounds good to me.
Yes, sir.
And we are back. All right, so this is it, guys. We've climbed all the Splatterhouse steps to get to this moment. Splatterhouse remake 2010. You know, I think I want to start off just by asking you, Rob, because this is part of how I sort of got to discover a lot about Splatterhouse and the remake, was going through your Instagram profile and some of your earlier pictures and things like that. You had a hand in this game to some extent. Could you talk about sort of what your involvement was with the Splatterhouse team and this game in particular?
I will say it was a roller coaster ride.
Okay.
I remember I first heard about it back when the announcement was made public on the cover of EGM back in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And someone emailed me about it. And I saw this email. At the time, I was living with a friend of mine. I was actually in the middle of getting divorced at the time. And I'm looking at it, it's like, Splatterhouse. This is new. This is like a picture of Rick I'd never seen before. I looked at my friend and it's like, I have a feeling I'm about to become very busy. Next thing I know, emails start pouring in. West Mansion guy, did you see this? And it's like people were going nuts. And then all of a sudden I get this email that says, greetings from Namco.
Oh, wow. So they just reached out to you directly.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
wow.
Wow, that's crazy.
And I read it. It's like, hi, this is PR guy from Namco Bandai. I see you picked up on the news. We're working on a new Splatterhouse game. And we wanted to get in touch with you because we have a feeling we'll be talking a lot in the near future.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to go ahead and get you set up with some cool content for your site and, get it. Help us promote the game and work together, get you some interviews. And my mouth's just kind of hanging open at this point, you know? It's like, wait. They know West Mansion? They know my site. And they're, what the hell? And then I get another email a minute or two later. And it's like, from one Splatterhouse fan to another. It's like, hi, my name is Dave Wilkins. I'm the lead artist on Splatterhouse. Glad you liked the cover I drew for EGM. And it's like, the game starts to get going, we're going to have to talk Splatterhouse fan to Splatterhouse fan. And so I'm like, Dave Wilkins, he's a comic artist. I Googled him, you know?
Yeah.
I was like, wow, he's done work for DC and Marvel, and this is real. So, of course, I start posting on the site, and things just took off like a rocket. A bottle rocket. And I say that deliberately. Because Bottle Rocket Entertainment was the one who was originally hired by Namco to develop the game.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, it was looking promising, kind of. It's like, so much of their stuff didn't really look Splatterhouse-like.
Yeah.
And a lot of the fans, and they started to sign up on my forum at the time, were pointing this out. And it's like, this is kind of I don't know. I expect lizard monsters in Halo. What were they doing in Splatterhouse?
Yeah.
And, well, it turns out there was a lot of turmoil going on behind the scenes. And eventually, Namco and Bottle Rocket parted ways, and Bottle Rocket shut down after that. Apparently, they were taking Namco's money and using it on anything but Splatterhouse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, Namco ended up hiring the entire team of programmers, along with Dave Wilkins, and bringing them in-house to join the Surge team that did Afro Samurai.
Okay.
And they pushed the release date back a year. And really kicked it into high gear at that point. As Dave told me, he's like, we're trying to rip all the silly non-Splatterhouse shit out of this and put real, original Splatterhouse stuff in.
Yeah.
So, he described the programmers as being dedicated fans, the kind of guys who bring their own copies of the original games to work with them. And around the same time, there was an artist who called himself Sal the Dark Cloak, who signed up on the Moon. And he had this fantastic Splatterhouse picture that he drew. And I mean, it's... you could see it on West Mansion. I think I posted it there with his permission, of course. And Dave apparently took that picture around to the guys, the art department and whatnot, and said, this is what we want this game to look like. And they were actually visiting the forum. They were listening to the fans. I was passing suggestions along. And I remember earlier you'd mentioned that one of your favorite things about the 2010 game was that the originals were included.
Yep.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was...
I actually practically begged the producer, Dan Tovar.
Yeah.
Like, you've got to include the original games unlockables for the fans. They've been waiting for something like this.
Yeah. It was something that I'll tell you right now, when I was not, like, around the 2010 time frame, I was not sort of aware of Splatterhouse, what was going on with all this. I just wasn't in the know. I was sort of... gaming wise, my interests were elsewhere. But later on, when I went back and I was like, oh, there's a Splatterhouse remake. I've heard of Splatterhouse. I really want to play it. I was sort of on the fence of like, should I get it? Should I not? And then when I found out that the original games were on there, that's what sealed the deal for me. Like immediately I was like, I need this. Because for me, it was just, it's a way to experience them on a console with a controller, obviously not the original controller, right. But it's just all in one convenient package for me. And I was like, that sort of sealed it for me. I was like, I'm definitely getting this.
And there were a lot of people who felt the same way. And that was what I was shooting for. And despite trying to get Wampako Graffiti included with the rest of the games, they said no.
Well, I was going to say, it's. I think the coolest part of your story really is that Namco reached out to you directly, and it really seems like the team really made an effort to, like you said, just take fan feedback, sort of work in conjunction with you and obviously to a lesser extent them, to try to make this something that they knew the fans would enjoy and would buy and be happy with.
Yeah, it's like they were doing their best not to make it a soulless cash in for nostalgia's sake, and they hooked me up. They really did. They gave me the interviews I asked for. Best thing, though, was in early 2010, when Namco Bandai was sponsoring a series of rock festivals across the country.
Yeah.
Turns out there was one coming to my neck of the woods up in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I emailed Dan. I was just like, hey, you're going to be up where I am. Think you hooked me up with some VIP passes, huh? I'm like, yeah. He'll say, yeah, haha, very funny. He writes back, sure, how many you need? And I'm like, whoa, he's being serious. Now, here's the kicker to this story. Turns out I had that day off because I was actually working in one of the casinos up in Connecticut at the time. But I'd asked for that day off for an unrelated event that I never went to.
Yeah.
But at the time, I was also between cars. So I was riding the employee bus to work. And I'm trying to find someone who'd be willing to go up to Worcester. And I'm waving these VIP passes in people's face online. It's like, dude, I will treat you to everything. I'll pay for your gas. I'll pay for your lunch.
Yeah.
Everything. No one took me up on it.
Really?
So it was coming up to where I had to give Dave an answer as to whether I'd make it or not. And I'm riding the bus in one day, and I'm talking to one of the other, I was security up there. So I was talking to one of the other officers. And he says to me, he's like, hey, do you know Brenton? Like, Brenton, no. Oh, he works first shift. He's probably there right now. He likes video games and horror and heavy metal. You should talk to him. So we get in there, and it turns out he was at lunch at the time, so I went to the cafeteria. And it was really funny because I said to him, it's like, you Brendan? It's like, yeah, I introduced myself. And it's like, I had these VIP passes to this heavy metal festival this weekend. His ears kind of perked up. Yeah, I'm supposed to be checking out this brand new horror video game. And at that point, he's practically standing up. And I need a ride up there. And he's like, it's very nice to meet you. Yeah, I'm totally cool with this. So I started talking to him about it, and he'd never heard of Splatterhouse before then, but by the time we were done, he was a fan.
That's amazing. And so you both got to go and had a great time?
We hung out with Dan for a while. We got to play the demo, which had never been released. To this day, has never been released to the public.
Yeah.
And we got to hang out with some of the bands and, got the whole VIP treatment.
Yeah, because the bands in that festival were featured on the soundtrack, correct?
Actually, not that festival, no.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
There were a couple
they
that
were
were
sort
rumored,
of doing a little sponsorship for it.
Exactly. So they were going around, they were sponsoring the Golden Gods show, and it's like SXSW, I think it was, and a few other concerts
South by Southwest or whatever it's called.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But at the time, something else too, since that was where he confirmed that they were not going to be putting Wanpaku graffiti in.
Yeah.
Well, you got to have some kind of reference in the game in there. Just, something we didn't mention when talking about Wanpaku was the English phrases in between the stages. Well, the one the fan base latched onto was "be garbage a cesspool." Ha ha ha. So I tell Dan that he'd never heard about it. And it's like, oh yeah, and I explain that. And he's like, pulls out his BlackBerry and he's like, what's that phrase again? It's like, "be garbage a cesspool." Taps into his phone, turns out, there, it's on the official Twitter account. People saw that, and the ones who knew I was going to be there were like, Rob made it. Rob made it. And
that's awesome.
I was talking to Dave Wilkins after that, and it's like, you guys have to put some kind of reference to Wanpaku in the game somewhere. Hey, I got an idea. Dave, you think you can do this? And he's like, what? Can you take and put the phrase "be garbage a cesspool" on one of the walls in the game somewhere as graffiti?
Oh.
And he's like, oh yeah, I can do that. There are 2 places in the game where it appears.
That's awesome. I'm gonna have to be on the lookout for that, because I definitely was not sort of paying attention to that when I was playing it.
Yeah, that's very cool.
And on top of that, when you complete phase 4, the achievement you get is "be garbage a cesspool."
I'm gonna play this game with a totally different perspective now, man.
Oh yeah, and I tell you, one of the biggest things that we ended up doing during the development was making sure Biggie Man was right.
Yeah,
the chainsaw.
Yeah, you
guy.
have to.
Well, the way they originally had him, he looked like an autopsy corpse with like scars and stitches, and he had skin and a saran wrap around his head, and it looked like something out of The Suffering or Manhunt or something like that.
Yeah,
it was not Splatterhouse.
Yeah.
So I talked to the fans; they were not happy. Talked to Dave, and he's like, "Yeah, I want to go ahead and get Biggie Man back to the way he should look." So he redesigned it, came up with a completely faithful to the original Biggie Man. Namco Bandai said no.
Wow.
And Dave argued with him. And like, okay, we'll give you this, but he's got to be fat. Like, why does he have to be fat? Just because he's Biggie Man? And it's like, no, because we wanted his silhouette to stand out in profile from Rick's. They look too much alike otherwise. Yeah, because Rick clearly has big chainsaw hands, right? But in the end, the redesign was accepted by the fans. And one person even commented, they're like, well, when you haven't really worked in 20 years, then, yeah, you kind of expect that you get a little overweight. Yeah. Just put it back on the treadmill or something. But in the end, he's got the same skin texture and the burlap sack and everything like the original, so.
Yeah. That's awesome. I wanted to touch on one of the things you talked about, because it was in my sort of research for this part of the episode. I really like the fact that the ways they promoted this game are so interesting. And it kind of throws me back to sort of when Splatterhouse was coming out, right? Like the early 90s, mid 90s, when like companies would do crazy sort of marketing crossovers, cross promotions, and gimmicks to like make sure people knew about their games. And Splatterhouse sort of threw it back to that, and I really, really like that. They did the cover of Fangoria magazine, which Dave did some custom artwork for. Namco Bandai partnered with Globe to do some special edition shoes, which I had no idea existed, and now I really want. I'm sure they're like hundreds of dollars.
Yeah, you'll be paying for those.
They look amazing. Jennifer was featured as a Playboy centerfold, which I was like, what?
Gamer Girl of the Month.
And those metal festivals they sponsored, like it wasn't just they were promoting the game, but they were promoting the game in ways that like are very Splatterhouse-y, you know what I mean? Like they sort of fit that mold. They know what the fans are like, they know what their interests are, and they sort of were pumping that straight to them.
Yeah, and that's kind of scratching the tip of the iceberg too.
Yeah.
They did a Splatterhouse skateboard at one point.
Oh my god.
They did of course they had the different pre-order bonuses you could get, like the Terramass statue.
Yep.
Which at the time Namco was actually, they had a surplus after the game was released because, the long hard fall, I guess you could say. And they were actually giving them away with orders people made on the Namco website.
Really?
Yeah. Try and get them for free now. Good luck.
I mean, yeah, they're definitely gone at this point.
Like you're saying, it's like a throwback. Did you ever see the stuff that NEC did for the Splatterhouse when it was released for the Turbo?
No.
There were shoelaces, there were stickers, there was a cutout terror mask, there was all sorts of junk they did.
Yeah. This is the kind of video game ephemera that, like, I want now as an adult. Like, as a kid, I couldn't have cared less. And now as an adult, I'm like, I want Splatterhouse shoelaces on my shoes.
That's the ultimate combination right there. Those NEC Splatterhouse shoelaces on the Globe shoes.
Yeah. That's a way to spend a few $100s. So it was interesting. I think we touched on this a little bit, but according to what I've read, it was sort of the way this came to be was also interesting, at least to me. It's Makoto Iwai, who was senior vice president at Namco Bandai's American branch, was sort of asked to find a game that would be popular with American audiences. And the reason I found that interesting is because it was interesting to me, a Japanese company like Namco sort of trying to put a North American audience first in terms of a subject for a game release. And sort of he ultimately landed on Splatterhouse, which I think is perfect. Like, obviously Namco Bandai is a story developer with, I can't even list like the great franchises and games they've developed, published, released, whatever you want to call it. And so, but I feel like Splatterhouse is, if you're targeting specifically a North American audience, Splatterhouse is probably top tier of what you could pick as far as a Namco Bandai franchise to try to bring back.
I have to agree. Something interesting about that, though. Apparently, they were looking for just IPs they could do with kind of more of a horror adult kind of thing, and Namco kind of forgot about Splatterhouse.
Oh, really?
They didn't realize they had it. Dan Tovar and Mark Brown, he said that, Dan had told me in 2006, I think it was, they put out a company-wide request for more mature content. Mm-hmm. And they were brainstorming one day, like, hey, remember Splatterhouse?
Yeah.
And they pitched it, and, that early 2007, they got the green light.
Oh, wow.
That's when it started. So they essentially remind them, hey, look, we kind of have one. We just haven't used it in years.
I wanted to ask you, Rob, specifically about this, like taking into consideration how this all came about and obviously how Namco reached out to you, how they sort of involved a lot of the fan community in this. Do you think like the idea to sort of start a game with the intent of specifically targeting it to appeal to an American audience, like, do you think it worked in the favor of Splatterhouse?
I'd have to say in a way it did, but given the nature of Splatterhouse, I had a feeling that it was going to end up being a cult classic just like the originals. Because, like I'd said much earlier, it's like those who get it, get it. And it's made for the people who do. And the thing is, they face additional challenges in trying to revive an old IP. Because it's like you have an entire generation of gamers who'd been born and raised and had never heard of Splatterhouse.
Yeah.
Like, ever. So, Namco Bandai was facing some challenges there. Because, for one, they had to not alienate the existing fan base. They had to basically convince this new generation, it's like, hey, Splatterhouse is something you want to play, because it's awesome. And at one time, they actually did publicly boast Splatterhouse will sell 1 million copies. They actually released that as like a press statement.
Wow.
And then 2 big monkey wrenches fell into the works. The first one being Bottle Rocket.
Yeah.
And it's like, if they'd done what they were supposed to, then things might have gone a little differently. And then there was a shakeup at Namco Bandai Japan.
Okay.
And the old CEO was out, and the new guy came in, and he had a thing against American studios, for one. And 2, he wanted to focus more on cell phone stuff.
Yeah.
So basically, by the time the game was getting close to release, it was far enough along where they couldn't shelve it because they'd already put way too much money into it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what they did do was pull all their support. It was like, the last things we got were a few print ads and YouTube video releases in the Jennifer Centerfold.
Yeah.
And then they just dumped it on the market. Just basically threw it out there, like, we'll collect whatever we can off this thing and then go. And it's telling when you find out that Splatterhouse never got released in Japan.
Yeah. But I did want to say, I played through Splatterhouse. I would recommend, I think they did something really smart in making the first 3 games unlockables as a sort of motivator to keep playing. It's a good, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed my time with it. There are some frustrating aspects to the games. There are some levels that I didn't enjoy as much as others, but overall as an experience, I thought it was really fun. It's a game I could see myself going back to and playing some more, especially since you get to keep your unlocked abilities, so it'd be fun to like go back through the game as powerful as possible. But I guess I wanted to ask both of you, starting with you, Anthony, like, what did you think about this game? Like the remake itself, what do you think about how it stacks up as part of the Splatterhouse franchise?
I think it's just a fun game, man. It's one of those games where you just like, and I refer to this a lot on previous episodes, but you know, those games where you just check your brain in and just have some fun with a video game. You know, the combat is smooth, the gameplay is smooth. Yeah, there were a few times where like you know, it gets redundant in some places where you have those set pieces and you just battle through and then you keep moving on and stuff like that. But like, to your point, being able to unlock the original games was definitely a motivating factor for me. And it's just, you know, especially talking to Rob now and getting more detail, like a lot about the behind the scenes stuff. This is such a great fan service, man. Like it tells you a lot about what a community can do to really get games out there that they love.
Yeah.
And so between doing all the research for this episode and talking to Rob now, man, I just have such a great appreciation for this game even more. I really can't wait to keep playing it and just finish it out, you know?
Yeah. What about you, Rob? Obviously, I know that you worked in some capacity. You helped bring this sort of to life in its current form, like how it eventually came out. What do you think of it? Obviously, we've talked a little bit about how when it came out, it sort of got mixed reviews at the time. You know, where do you think this sort of lands in the Splatterhouse sort of oeuvre, the franchise as a whole?
Oh, if I was to personally rate it, and I don't know how it's going to sound, but it's actually dead last. It's a great game. I am biased. I do jokingly call it my game because of my unofficial consultant capacity on it.
Yeah. But
I've always been more of a classic guy. So,
okay.
And that's the only reason that it rates as low as it does.
Yeah. So. And I mean that's nothing to sneeze at. You know, you got 3 games that are very good.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like it's not going up against some stiff competition here. Right. I did want to ask you, as being such a big fan of it, I guess to sort of tie this all up and bring it home, do you think this is a property that Namco should look into continuing in some way, shape, or form, or do you think that it's sort of gone through its cycle and people should just enjoy the ones that exist?
Absolutely, they should. They left it on a cliffhanger, for one thing, which may never be resolved. But there's just so much fertile ground there they could work with. And it's like, if people didn't like the way it ended up before, there are plenty of places for it to go. Mm-hmm. Frankly, with the way the game turned out, it's amazing it turned out as well as it did, considering the obstacle they had to overcome.
Yeah.
You know? So, but there is so much there. And even Dan Tovar has said if they ever decided they wanted to go and pick it up again, if they could get the old gang back together, they'd gladly start working on a sequel.
That's awesome. That's awesome to hear. And it's definitely, like, talking to people like you, that's why I really appreciate this perspective, because for somebody like me, it's like, oh, you know, this is the game, this is how it came out. You don't necessarily get the background on what all was going on, what sort of challenges the team was working with, how they overcame all that to give you this product. And now that gives me a new appreciation for the game I'm playing.
One thing I do want to point out, though, was the caliber of voice acting they had in that game.
Oh, yes. Jim Cummings, we've talked about this as the Terror Mask.
Yes.
Is a stroke of genius. I loved his character all throughout, and I thought he did an excellent job.
He was the highlight, definitely.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I ever heard him say the line, for a dick, you're such a pussy. And I'm like, did Winnie the Pooh just call me a pussy?
He sure did.
That was hilarious.
Absolutely did.
It's like, whoa, Darkwing Duck just dropped the F-bomb.
That's the thing, man. Is somebody like Jim Cummings such a hero of all our childhoods, or at least my childhood.
Yeah.
And just seeing him in this is such a treat. Seeing like something like that makes me very happy. I'm glad they decided to do that.
On top of that, Josh Keaton too. He was the voice of Spider-Man on one of the animated series. He did the voice of Rick. And
yeah.
He really sold it as just an average guy who's stuck in this completely insane situation.
Yeah, he really did. He really brought it home. I can't really think of a bad voice performance in that game.
I do admit I was expecting to hear Jennifer plug Wendy's at one point. She was the same actress who did the voice of the Wendy's girl.
That's right. Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's awesome. I'm
telling you, the information we're getting here is.
I need to look up the filmographies for all these people now. Because Jim Cummings was the one I got right off the bat, and I knew Rick, I'd heard him before, but now now that you've mentioned Jennifer as well, I'm like, I need to look up everybody on this voice cast.
And something else worth mentioning, there was a rumor going around too that Jim Cummings was completely embarrassed with the whole thing and had disowned it.
Yeah.
And it turns out that couldn't be further from the truth. I've talked to several fans who have met him at cons, and he proudly embraces that whole thing. He's like, yeah, I was a Terror Mask.
That's awesome to hear. I hope if I ever get to meet him, I'd like him to autograph my copy of Splatterhouse. I think me too. That would be my prized possession. But with that, I think we can sort of bring this conversation to a close. Rob, thank you so much for joining us. This has been really an obviously an insightful, informative conversation for us, and I hope the people listening find it entertaining as well. But I've definitely grown a new appreciation for Splatterhouse after talking to you about it.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to have been a part of this.
Awesome. Well, you guys, you can find us, everywhere podcasts are sold. You can find us on Instagram at Region Free Gamers Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Region Free Gamer. You can find our website, regionfreegamers.com. And Rob, why don't you tell us where they can find you as well?
Well, I'm on Instagram myself. You can look me up, The Real Dyer 51.
Yep.
And if you look on Amazon, you can find both Memoirs of a Virtual Caveman and the Hard Dreaming 101 Guide to Retro Horror. Just for people who don't know, Memoirs is kind of a personal story about growing up during the golden age of gaming.
Okay.
And there's a lot about Splatterhouse in there, including a lot of stuff I covered today.
So good to talk to you today, Rob, though. It really has been so much fun.
Oh, definitely.
So much education has occurred.
Yeah, I feel... I really do. I feel a lot more appreciative of this series. And I hope you guys listening out there will if you haven't, will give it a shot. All of them. Just go out, get that 2010 version. Get it on Xbox 360, get it on PS3, and just play through it. It's worth it just to get the 3 unlockables and then play through those as well and figure out how to play Wampaka Graffiti while you're at it. But thank you guys so much for listening. Truly appreciate all of you. And we'll see you next time. We're always going to try to do our best. Peace.
Save your stickers.
Yep, definitely.